Talk of a female diaconate continues to be heard at the Vatican, while the teaching on divorced and remarried Catholics is challenged. The Papal Posse, Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray, return with analysis. And later, how will you and your money be affected by the Trump administration's policies and the global economic landscape? Financial expert and founder of the Ave Maria Mutual Funds, George Schwartz, tells us. And finally, at a time when some say there's little connection between what one believes and what one lives, Father Paul Scalia suggests a different way in his new book, That Nothing May Be Lost. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Father Gerald Murray, Robert Royal, George Schwartz, and Father Paul Scalia are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout the show, and I have some specialty content on my feed for you. Or you can email us at worldover@ewtn.com. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. Tensions with North Korea continues to rise as the United States ratchets up pressure on the communist nation to abandon its nuclear and missile programs. Vice President Mike Pence said on a tour through Asia that the era of strategic patience with North Korea is over. As the U.S. sends another aircraft carrier to the region, Pence was aboard the USS Ronald Reagan on Wednesday.
The United States of America will always seek peace. But under President Trump, the shield stands guard and the sword stands ready. We will defeat any attack and meet any use of conventional or nuclear weapons with an overwhelming and effective American response.
Earlier in the week, North Korea's deputy ambassador to the UN accused the United States of creating a dangerous situation in which a thermonuclear war may break out at any moment. And it was another chaotic week in Syria, which has left scores of civilians dead. The reciprocal evacuations of thousands from 2 pro-government and 2 opposition-held towns was disrupted by a suspected ISIS bombing on Saturday. It killed more than 120 pro-government evacuees, most of them children. On Tuesday, as many as 20 more were killed, including civilians, in a U.S.-led coalition airstrike on ISIS targets. Meanwhile, civilians have begun to flee the ISIS stronghold of Raqqa as U.S.-backed forces took control of several adjacent villages. The liberation of the villages could be the beginning stages of the battle to expel ISIS from Raqqa. And jihadi violence continues in Egypt a week ahead of Pope Francis's visit there. 1 police officer was killed and 4 men wounded on Tuesday when Islamic State terrorists attacked the ancient monastery of St. Catherine on Mount Sinai. The attack occurred at a police checkpoint outside the monastery, and the aggressors were repelled. A spokesman for the Greek Orthodox monastery said that the monks were never in danger. Built in the 6th century, St. Catherine's Monastery houses a priceless collection of icons and ancient manuscripts. It is the oldest active monastery in the world and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Pope Francis arrives in Egypt on April 28th. And British lawmakers on Wednesday voted to back Prime Minister Theresa May's call for a national election on June 8th. In a surprise Downing Street statement a day earlier, May said early elections will give the country certainty and stability as it negotiates its departure from the European Union.
At this moment of enormous national significance, there should be unity here in Westminster. But instead, there is division. The country is coming together, but Westminster is not.
May further accused her opponents of political game playing. The election is expected to consolidate the Conservative Party's power, as Labour, Liberal Democrats and the Scottish National Party have all worked to undermine the government since last year's Brexit referendum. A resounding win would bolster her mandate in upcoming Brexit talks with the European Union. And police in China have taken 2 underground Catholic bishops into custody. Bishop Peter Xiao Zhumin and Bishop Vincent Guaozin were arrested as they were about to celebrate the Paschal Triduum. The bishops were recognized by the Vatican, but not by the Communist Chinese government. Asia News reported that police have asked the faithful to bring clothing to Bishop Zhu Zhumin, a sign that his imprisonment will be long-term. Meanwhile, Bishop Ma Dakin, who has been under house arrest for publicly resigning from the government-backed Catholic Patriotic Association in 2012, concelebrated Easter Mass with a Beijing-appointed bishop. The concelebration was a public relations victory for the communist regime. Earlier this year, Bishop Ma stunned loyal Catholics by issuing a public apology for his opposition to the Patriotic Association. And French presidential candidate Marine Le Pen says she's angry with the Catholic Church for interfering in French politics. In an interview with LaCroix, the Conservative National Front party leader said religious leaders like Pope Francis should not insert themselves in public policy debates. Le Pen said, quote, "I don't get involved with what the Pope should say to his followers, and I don't think religious should tell the French people how to vote," end quote. Le Pen also spoke of her religious faith, which she described as strong and unwavering. She went on to criticize Pope Francis and the French bishops for repeatedly urging nations to accept immigrants without any restrictions. Le Pen supports the banning of the Muslim headscarf in public and much tighter immigration laws in France. The first round of voting begins next week with the final election vote scheduled for May 7th. And Pope Francis has appointed 13 new consultors to the Vatican Secretariat for Communications. EWTN CEO and Chairman Michael Warsaw is one of the 3 Americans who will serve Pope Francis in an advisory capacity. Jesuit Father James Martin of America Magazine and Boston PR executive Ann Carter are the other 2 Americans chosen. The appointment of Father James Martin has generated some controversy. Martin is a popular author and blogger and advocate for LGBT rights. Among the other appointees are Graham Ellis of BBC Radio, a UN representative, and several deans of pontifical universities in Rome. More on this later with the Papal Posse. And actor Gary Sinise was awarded a star on the iconic Hollywood Walk of Fame this week. He was honored for his decades of acting and tireless work on behalf of our nation's troops and veterans. Sinise, a guest of our show in the past, is known for such memorable roles as Detective Mac Taylor on CSI New York and ruthless kidnapper Jimmy Shaker in Mel Gibson's Ransom. Of course, his best-known performance came as Lieutenant Dan Taylor in 1994's Forrest Gump. He's toured ceaselessly as the bassist and frontman of his own Lieutenant Dan band, entertaining our troops all over the world. He formed the Gary Sinise Foundation in 2011. Fittingly, the ceremony included a color guard.
I'm grateful for these heroes and all who continue to defend us. It's a gift to be able to use some of the success that I've had in the movie and television business to try to do some good for those who serve and sacrifice each day for our precious freedom.
Congratulations, Gary. And finally, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI celebrated his 90th birthday on Easter Sunday. He did it with great Bavarian flair, which included a party and a mug of beer, a rather large mug of beer. He was joined by his brother, Monsignor Georg Ratzinger, and a host of visitors from Bavaria. The retired Roman pontiff looked happy and thrilled by the festivities. Among the presents given to Benedict was a gift basket full of Bavarian pretzels, and Martin Rothweiler of EWTN Germany presented the Pope with a copy of my book, Mother Angelica, Her Grand Silence. Martin is there with Benedict's longtime assistant and secretary to 2 popes, Archbishop Georg Ganswein. The Archbishop told Martin that the Pope Emeritus is doing remarkably well given his age. He's in good spirits, very clear in his head, and still has a good sense of humor, which we're all happy to hear. Happy birthday to Pope Benedict XVI. And I could not let April 20th go by without remembering our dear Mother Mary Angelica on what would have been her 94th birthday. How we miss you, Reverend Mother. A happy birthday to you as well. And the Will Wilder Book Tour rolls along. I'll be back home in New Orleans, Louisiana at the Barnes & Noble in Metairie on Tuesday, May 2nd at 7 p.m. Then I'm headed to Chicagoland on Friday, May 5th. I'll be signing books at Anderson's Bookshop in LaGrange, Illinois at 7 p.m. And on Saturday, May 6th, I'll be in Dallas, Texas, at the Northwest Highway, Barnes & Noble at 3 p.m. All the details are at RaymondArroyo.com. I expect to see you and the kids there. When we return, could we see women deacons in the Catholic Church? And should we question Jesus' teaching on divorce? The Papal Posse, Robert Royal, and Father Gerald Murray. Join us to discuss this and much more when The World Over continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. There never seems to be a dull moment at the Vatican. Pope Francis is suggesting that rules are about to be shaken. There's talk of women deacons in the church, questions about Jesus' teaching on divorce, and new members of a Vatican communications office have been appointed. To explain and analyze all of this, we're joined by the Papal Posse, Editor-in-Chief of theCatholicThing.org, Robert Royal, and Father Gerald Murray, canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, both via satellite from Manhattan. Gentlemen, thank you for both being here. I want to start with this recent interview that Cardinal Schönborn gave. And during the course of this interview, Cardinal Christoph Schönborn of Vienna voiced openness to reintroducing the female diaconate in the Western Church. And he had this to say when asked what he told committed women who felt discriminated against where only men were ordained. He said, "I can understand the malaise which women feel when they see only men concelebrate. I can understand that we must look like a men's squad up at the altar." Then, during the Pope's Easter Vigil homily, His Holiness had this to say about God upsetting the rules. Quote, "When the high priest and the religious leaders in collusion with the Romans believed that they could calculate everything, that the final word had been spoken, and that it was up to them to apply it, God suddenly breaks in, upsets all the rules, and offers new possibilities. God once more comes to meet us to create and consolidate a new age, the age of mercy." Now, this came after a reflection on the faithfulness of women in the Church. What are you hearing in Pope Francis's words and in Cardinal Schönborn's suggestions? Is this perhaps paving the way for changes in the Church on the question of women deacons, married priests?
Well, Raymond, it's certainly something to be concerned about because Cardinal Schönborn is a very close associate of Pope Francis, and for him to speak about Mass with only men celebrating Mass as priest as being, a discriminatory moment causing anxiety among women who are present, this is an ideological take on revelation. Jesus did not choose any women to be priests, and the apostles did not choose any women to be deacons. Now, we had deaconesses in the history of the Church, and they still exist in Orthodoxy, but deaconesses are not women deacons. They were not ordained to carry out the diaconal functions, which in the Catholic Church are part of the sacrament of holy orders. When a deacon acts, he's acting as someone who's been ordained to holy orders. So it would be a very, very serious matter if women were proposed for ordination as deacons, and I hope and pray that it doesn't come to that because it would be very, very serious.
Robert Royal, nevertheless, Pope Francis did appoint this investigative committee to examine the question of a female diaconate. Now, this had already been explored under previous papacies not very long ago. Does this fuel the expectation that something is coming? Is that what we're reading here? And is that what you heard in the papal homily on Easter?
Yeah, I think that it operates on multiple levels. There is this one way in which it plays into this discussion about deaconesses And I think Father is exactly right. First of all, it has been studied before, and the idea has just been simply rejected. It doesn't exist in the tradition. I noticed in reading that homily on Easter Vigil that it was cast a little bit more broadly, that women represented all the marginalized and downtrodden and oppressed, their faces throughout the world. And I think that's a legitimate point to make. The problem I have with this is that there's a way in which the Holy Father suggests, maybe he means to do it or maybe he doesn't mean to do it, but he tends to suggest that rules in and of themselves are somehow oppressive, as if, say the rule of law, the rule of canon law, an orderly way of proceeding in a business or in the church itself, that those things are not facilitators, that they are actually oppressive of people per se. So there tends to be, maybe he's attempting to be prophetic, you could put it in a positive sense, and I think that is one side of his papacy. But there's another side of it which almost suggests something anarchic, that all rules are somehow an imposition on human liberty. And in this particular context, I think because of other fears we've had about what's been developing in the Vatican, it wouldn't be improper to worry that this might be the beginning of something much larger.
I want to move on to Robert Cardinal Sarah, who is the head of the Office of Divine Worship in Rome. Now, recently he gave an address, and it sounds to my ears almost like a prophetic warning about the nature of the Church's present crisis of faith. Cardinal Sarah said, as Benedict XVI often emphasized, at the root of the liturgy is adoration, and therefore God. Hence, it is necessary to recognize that the serious, profound crisis that has affected the liturgy and the Church itself since the Council is due to the fact that its center is no longer God and the adoration of Him, but rather men and their alleged ability to do something to keep themselves busy during the Eucharistic celebrations. Cardinal Sarah was very blunt in these comments. The Church, he claims, is in crisis after all this time, and the reform of the reform, is it? Robert Royal.
Yeah, I mean, this is very, very strong language, and I'm very happy that he actually put this out in a very direct way, because I hear from a lot of different people of various orientations in the Church that they find that the liturgy is flat, and I think the reason is precisely what he identifies, is that instead of opening us out to the transcendent, instead of God coming into the world and instituting the Eucharist and saying to us, this is a way that physically you and I become one, and you are lifted out of what you think of as just your normal humdrum life. The turning inside was a kind of an attempt to be more communal. And communities are fine if God is the center of the community, if the city of God is what we're after and God is put at the center of what we're all doing. But there clearly was an effort to do something else in the 1960s. It wasn't as if these things were spelled out in the documents of Vatican II. They just were imposed by a bunch of people who had an agenda, and an ideological agenda at that. So we may be coming to the end of the period where we're just going to accept this and muddle along. I think that Cardinal Sarah is a prophetic voice and a very important voice at this moment in the history of the Church.
Father Jerry, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but I want to add this. And you certainly can react to Cardinal Sarah's address. Bishop Robert Morlino of Madison has also reacted. Now, he's asking that people in his diocese, particularly children about to receive communion, that they should do so and be instructed to do so on their knees and on their tongue as a way to demonstrate reverence. Why does this matter, and why now?
This is great. I really love Bishop Morlino. He's a great figure in the hierarchy in the United States and in the Church in general. And he has realized, I think, the need to confront a real serious problem, which is lack of faith in the real presence of Christ, because of the casual way in which the Holy Eucharist has been distributed and received. Per se, there's nothing illegitimate with communion in the hand, but in practice, I think many priests would agree with me, it has not promoted a deeper faith in the real presence. It's promoted casualness, forgetfulness. I know my last parish, we had communion kneeling at all the Masses, and I could tell, kneeling down, you pause, you wait for the priest to come to you, you're not constantly moving. And then when you receive on the tongue, it's, God is feeding you. So we take from the hands of the priest right into our mouth the most holy body of Christ. This will promote Eucharistic faith, and I'm very pleased that the bishop is doing this.
Now, Father,
Raymond, if I can add just a
go
word
ahead,
on
very
this.
quickly. Go ahead, Robert.
You may remember that when we had our discussion on Amoris Laetitia up in Assumption College a few months back, it was partly reproduced on EWTN.
Yeah.
The local bishop mentioned how the apparent capacity now to provide communion to the divorced and remarried without an annulment, he felt was partly the result of the reduction in reverence toward the Eucharist and receiving it in the hand. That there had been a kind of a stepping down, step by step, so that why not? You know, this isn't something all that special. So bringing back concrete practices like this really does remind people, in a world in which everything is very much put on a horizontal plane, that there is something very special happening, unique happening in the course of the Eucharist that happens in no other place on earth.
You gave me a perfect opening and a nice segue talking about Amoris Laetitia. Father Thomas Rees wrote an article in the National Catholic Reporter recently that I know gave Father Jerry a little indigestion, so I'm going to get him to react to this. In it, Father Rees suggests that those who cite Jesus' words in Matthew 19 when discussing Pope Francis's teaching on divorced and remarried Catholics might be in error. The Gospel says, "Therefore, what God has joined together, no human being must separate. Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery." Now, Father Rees says Jesus said a lot of things we don't take literally, and this line should be subjected to that sort of scrutiny. Father Jerry, your reaction?
Very, very regrettable, in fact, stunning renunciation of belief in the Lord's words on this matter. You know, Father Rees also says in the article that Jesus gave this as a feminist teaching, and that who knows if he would still say the same thing because women's rights have progressed now. There's a lot of silliness going on in the world. This is an example of it. It's very regrettable when a priest in the church and an educated man like this would say that whatever Jesus said in the gospel, it's subject to reinterpretation. That's why the Lord gave us the magisterium. Remember what he said to the apostles, "He who hears you hears me." And he said, "Peter, you will turn and strengthen your brethren." It's up to the hierarchy. And they have solemnly determined that indissolubility of marriage is the intent of Christ in those words. So when Amoris Laetitia came out, we heard a lot about this being simply a disciplinary matter. It really is a doctrinal matter, as we see now that people like Father Rees are saying we should discard the indissolubility of marriage. So very, very regrettably said that.
Father Rees makes the case in the piece. He says, look, Jesus said, if your eye offends you, pluck it out. And we don't go around pulling our eyes out every time we look at something, unfortunate. And he says, how do we determine which words of Jesus are absolutes or open to interpretation? That's really the heart of the article and the big question he raises.
Yeah, well, how do we know? We turn to the church, and the church tells us what it means. We don't believe in private interpretation of Scripture. If you want to have your own Bible church and you tell us what it means, well, that's departing from apostolic unity. The church is the one that tells us, and the church has told us clearly, this is a fundamental bedrock teaching, and it goes back to the Lord's own creation. Male and female, he created them to be united. The disunity that it results from divorce was something that the Lord was against, absolutely.
Raymond, I think it's very telling that the entire tradition of the Church for 2,000 years had no difficulty in interpreting these passages correctly, that you don't pluck your eye out, although Jesus is making the point that it's a very serious thing to misuse your sight or your human powers. We had no problem discerning about which things were to be taken literally and which things were to be taken figuratively. And the fact that someone in our society, where there has been an utter disaster on the sexual front for the last half century, thinks that somehow the tradition ought to be interpreted in terms of current sexual mores, which are not good for human beings. They're not good for women any more now than any other time in history. I think it's disingenuous to say that we can reinterpret it to accord with something that clearly was not taught at the beginning of Christianity and is not helpful to us at this point in history.
I want to shift attention to the Order of Malta, which we've been covering in recent weeks, a group that has been really traumatized in recent days. Their former leader, Fra Festing, was removed, And just last week, the Pope's special delegate to Malta instructed Festing not to travel to Rome for the election of his successor. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I haven't talked to members about this latest development, but it's very puzzling. And I say this because I highly respect the Order of Malta. I respect Fra Festing, who as Grand Master did a lot of good. There was a controversy. The Pope asked him to resign. And now, as they elect the new Grand Master at the end of this month, the question comes up, why would you, in the name of restoring peace and harmony to the order, exclude someone who was a devoted servant of the order for so many years from what is his right? His right as a professed knight is to be part of the Grand Council that does the election. So puzzling, and I guess for me personally, a cause of sadness that this measure was judged to be useful by the papal delegate, Archbishop Becciu. I think it's a mistake, personally.
Well, this is, I mean, just standing on the outside looking in, there's always lots of talk of freedom. And then you see things like this happen where it's, the church sort of is exerting control. Now, this is a sovereign entity, a sovereign state, the Knights of Malta. And there doesn't seem to be due regard for the freedom of the members and little concern for the souls and what might happen as a result. Finally, the Pope appointed new consultors to the Secretariat for Communication, his new office to reform the communications apparatus in the Vatican. EWTN CEO Michael Warsaw was one of those new consultors, as was Father James Martin, the best-selling author. Now, his appointment has generated a lot of commentary. Your thoughts? Robert Royal, I'll start with you, and then Father Jerry, you can have a crack at it.
Yeah, I find this to be kind of an unusual set of appointments. I mean, we know why Michael Warsaw was appointed. He's a very fine man. Been involved with communications for many years. Father Martin is a very humorous man. He has a good media manner. But it seems to me that you could have found someone else who had not waded in so controversially, in particular about relations with people with same-sex attraction. I mean, this has been one of his constant themes. He's written a book about the way that the church ought to deal with people with same-sex attraction. And I understand in a way why a council like this would like to balance off with someone who's seen as more traditional, with someone who's seen as more progressive. But it's very odd that they would reach for such a radically progressive person, and particularly on this question of same-sex relations. So I think it sends out a message that didn't have to be sent out, that somehow there's, even in dealing with media questions, we're going to be dealing with homosexual questions.
Father Jerry, you had two cardinals endorse that book. I mean, Father Martin's book about building bridges to the LGBT community, it's been endorsed by Cardinal Tobin, it's been endorsed by Cardinal Cupich, and now the Holy Father just appointed him to this media position, seems to embrace the ideas put forward there.
Well, I'm waiting for the book to come out, and I think it was Cardinal Farrell, not Cardinal Cupich, who endorsed it, but I don't know the whole list of endorsees. I will say this. Father Martin recently said that he's in favor of transgender bathrooms, and that he thinks that that's a right, and that if boys want to use a girl's room and girls want to use a boy's room, that this is okay. For me, that indicates a profound lack in his appreciation of Christian anthropology, of modesty, of the respect that we have for the rights of people for privacy in matters relating to their body. I think it indicates a profound misunderstanding of what the Church teaches about male and female. As regards same-sex marriage and the like, Father Martin has never, as far as I can tell, been a supporter of courage, and those institutions in the Church are trying to promote chastity and heroic fidelity to Christ's gospel. He always seems, in my opinion, and I'm willing to be corrected, but he always seems to be saying homosexuality is something that is objectively there from God and we have to respect it. And my answer is no. Homosexuality is not God's intent for any human being. It's a disorder. It's intrinsically disordered according to the Catechism. And to say that is not to offend people, it's to give them the liberating truth. He doesn't go that route. He goes the route of understanding and of reception and all the rest, which for me, that's a dead end, and I'm disappointed that the Vatican would not put all of these factors into consideration before naming him, because For me, it's disqualifying. If a priest says that men should be able to use women's rooms if they want to, that's not the kind of advice I think should be given by a priest.
Father Jerry Murray, Robert Royal, thank you for being here. You can keep up with Robert Royal and Father Gerald's commentary at thecatholicthing.org. Thanks, Posse. We'll be in touch with you soon. When we return, financial advisor George Schwartz is here to discuss your money in this new Trump economy and the status we're seeing in that economy and how you can invest wisely and morally. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
So we're in very good shape on tax reform. We have the concept of the plan. We're going to be announcing it very soon. But health care, we have to get the health care taken care of. And as soon as health care takes care of, we are going to march very quickly. You're going to watch. We're going to surprise you. Right, Steve Mnuchin? Right?
Welcome back to the World Over. President Trump there. Investing your money is always a challenge, and with the new administration in Washington, we're seeing more economic growth, but not as much as some had hoped. What is in store for all of us financially in this new Trump economy? And what about health care and tax reform? Here to tell us how we can get the most return for our investments and making wise and moral financial decisions is the founder and portfolio manager of the Ave Maria Mutual Funds. Welcome back to the program, George Schwartz. He joins us via satellite from Michigan. George, thanks for being here. George, last time you were with us, President Trump had not been elected. There was a market bounce, a so-called relief rally, but now things seem to be slowing and they're very static. What's going on?
Well, since the election, the capital markets have generally been upward, and I would characterize that as a relief rally, a relief that Barack Hussein Obama is no longer in the White House, and additionally, Hillary Clinton is not the president now, because having another 4 years of a Democrat in the White House, a pro-abortion Democrat nonetheless, might have been almost cataclysmic for the economy, and it certainly would have hurt the chances of Roe versus Wade being repealed, which, of course, we all keep hoping and praying for.
How critical is it for Trump to get a tax reform plan through Congress this year?
This year is the big year. It's got to be done this year, Raymond. And he's been saying, and others, that you have to get the health care insurance situation squared away first.
Right.
In other words, get rid of Obamacare. You know, everyone refers to it as health care, but it's really health care insurance we're talking about. And the reason it has to be taken care of first, as I understand it, is that there's some onerous tax provisions in Obamacare, which, if they're not taken out or not reversed, makes the tax reform or tax rate reductions much more inefficient or much more hard to achieve. So I think the administration's going to bring back the health insurance reform bill soon, and hopefully it can get through, and hopefully even a half a loaf will be better than none.
Tell us about that tax reform plan. Do you think the tax rates should be retroactive?
Well, the great Milton Friedman used to say he would take a tax reduction anytime, anywhere, for anybody, for any purpose. And he was my favorite economist for many, many years. Larry Kudlow was my second favorite economist. When Dr. Friedman passed away, Larry became my first favorite economist.
Okay.
But yeah, tax reduction is crucial. No question about it. Tax rate reduction is crucial, especially for corporations.
Okay, we're going to get to that in a moment. What did the failure to pass the health care reform bill the first time? That was a big push on Capitol Hill. It failed. What was the market reaction?
Well, the market didn't like it because, you know, President Trump was saying that he was going to repeal and replace Obamacare immediately. Well, when he got to the White House, he found out things don't go exactly smoothly all the time, especially when you have to deal with the Congress. But the long term is still positive, and it will be even more positive for the economy and the stock market if if President Trump can get health care insurance reform done and tax rate reductions completed this year. That'll be very important. If they can't get those things done, it's very bad news for Republicans.
Oh boy. Speaking of tax reform, this is Vice President Mike Pence speaking this week in Tokyo about the taxes on businesses. Listen.
Our corporate tax rate, sadly, is one of the highest in the developed world. It's more than 10% higher than the tax rate here in Japan. President Trump's plan is to slash the corporate tax rate and reform the tax code and make it simpler, flatter, and fairer. Rest assured, our tax reform plan will make the strongest economy in the world stronger still, and it will benefit every business represented here today.
Now, George Schwartz, a member of your board, Larry Kudlow, and some of his pals, Steve Forbes, Stephen Moore, another economist, have written an op-ed, and they suggest the president should move forward and do an immediate corporate tax rate cut. Forget the omnibus tax cut and focus just on that. You would say what?
I'd say if the president did that, it would be a great plus, not only for corporate America, but for employment in the country and growth generally, growth in GDP, growth in corporate profits, and increased prosperity across the board. The American tax rate on corporations is ridiculous, and it should be cut substantially. And the net result would be, in my view, an increase in revenues to the Treasury, not a reduction.
Now, they claim, your economist friends that I just mentioned, Forbes, Steve Moore, and Larry Kudlow, who's on your Ave Maria board, they claim that it would stimulate hiring and be good for workers. But it seems politically unrealistic, isn't it, George? I mean, you can't give corporations a tax cut and not give the worker and the middle class a tax cut, too.
Yeah, everyone should get a tax cut, but the one that'll have the most impact is if the tax rate on corporations is reduced.
Okay.
That's what can really stimulate the economy and stimulate job creation.
Let's talk about investment.
And stimulate prosperity.
Let's talk about investment for a minute. What's the biggest risk that you see for investors right now and their biggest misconception as they jump into this market?
Well, you asked me that question before the election, and I said the biggest risk for investors was if Hillary Clinton won the presidency. Thank God that didn't happen. The biggest risk now is if the Republican Party can't get tax reform done and health care insurance reform done. If those things can't get done and done this year, I think the Republicans have a real risk of going the way of the Whig Party. And that would be disastrous if we lost Republicans and conservatives speaking out in Washington and implementing pro-growth, low-tax rate policies. So the challenge is for Mr. Trump to get his act together.
What's the biggest misconception that people have when they come into your office, when they come to invest in Ave Maria funds or in any other index funds, which are exploding right now, by the way?
Oh, yeah. I think the biggest misconception most investors have is that they can outguess the near-term swings in the market. And they'll say things like, gee, the market's gone up a lot. Maybe I better just hold off investing. Or maybe I should sell some stocks and raise cash to be more defensive. I've quoted to you before the late and great John Templeton, Sir John Templeton. And he always said, the best time to invest in a good mutual fund is when you have the money to do so. And he'd also say frequently over the years that any day is a good enough day to invest in a good enough mutual fund. And our Ave Maria mutual funds are plenty good in my view. So people have this misconception that they can outguess the market, and that's a big, big mistake.
I read a piece this week where Vanguard now has billions of dollars of assets in their mutual funds. And tell people the difference between what Vanguard does and what you do at the Ave Maria Fund. Is it a managed fund, or do you use computer data to drive your investments?
We use a lot of computers, but not to drive the investment process, just to do research and statistical tabulations. But Vanguard invented the index funds, and I think they have over $1 trillion now in some of their index funds. Fidelity, the same thing, over $1 trillion in index funds. Index funds simply invest, for example, the S&P 500 index fund, invest in all 500 companies in the S&P 500,
Right.
and when new money comes in, they have to buy those same stocks. When money comes out of the index funds, they have to sell those same stocks. By the way, those index funds are not screened for moral principles the way our Ave Maria mutual funds are screened.
Are you experiencing the same level of gains, George Schwartz, as we're seeing in the index funds or these kind of automatic mutual funds?
We've been very fortunate. Our investment performance has been very good, and has each of the funds last year, for instance, each of our funds exceeded its benchmark in investment performance. And we have the benefit, too, of having our funds screened by our Catholic Advisory Board, which screens out abortion and pornography and a few things like that. But we've been blessed, too, with the net inflow of money. We've had significant inflows, net inflows of money this year. Most mutual funds, most actively managed mutual funds, like ours, have had net redemptions this year as money has flowed into the index funds literally by the billions.
Oh, it's an amazing phenomenon. George Schwartz, thank you for being here, for your insight. And if you're interested in finding out more about morally responsible investing, you can visit AveMariaFunds.com. Their phone number is 866-AVE-MARIA. When we return, does doctrine get in the way of faith? Or does it go hand in hand with true devotion? Author of That Nothing May Be Lost, Father Paul Scalia, will enlighten us when The World Over returns. Stay right there.
Among the 5 boys, the first 2 are lawyers. The third one's the priest, and I say only half-jokingly that I think 1 priest makes up for 2 lawyers.
Welcome back to The World Over. That was the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia talking about his sons, one of whom joins us tonight, the priest, to talk about the intersection between the nuts and bolts of church teaching and true faith. He's the author of the new book, That Nothing May Be Lost, Reflections on Catholic Doctrine and Devotion, as well as the Vicar for Clergy in the Diocese of Arlington. Please welcome Father Paul Scalia back to the show.
Thank you.
Great
Good to be with
see
you again.
I want to start with the title of this book, which you gathered from the only miracle that appears in all 4 of the Gospels.
Right. And
tell us why this title.
The first aspect of that quote, actually, that I was drawn to was fragments left over. Our Lord, at the end of the miracle of the loaves and fish, tells the apostles, gather the fragments left over, that nothing may be lost. And the fragments left over, it kind of appealed to me because that's kind of, one way in which I think I kind of see these essays, because I'm not breaking any new ground, this is all just...
Which you admit in the introduction.
Yes, absolutely. But there is something compelling about that nothing may be lost as regards, the Church's teaching, the devotions, and things like that. And so here's a contribution to that effort to make sure that the fullness of the Church's teaching and traditions, devotions are handed on.
And it is broken up into sections. You do, and it's a series. These are really it's Father Paul Scalia's greatest hits. It's your homilies and it's the sacraments, it's prayer, it's the Virgin Mary, it's feasts. You really touch all of these bases, and to my eye, it would be a resource to a lot of priests who are struggling, I guess, to write that homily.
I would be honored if it
minute.
is that for priests. That would be a great honor.
But how did you decide on this form? Because you have a series of some well-known Catholic writers, some not, and one very tragic choice.
Well-known, but
yeah.
Well, anyway.
Yeah,
infamous.
you were infamous. You must have been trying to attract a really diverse crowd of Catholicism. I write one of the introductions to the book. Full disclosure.
Great introduction on the section on feasts. Who better than somebody from New Orleans?
There you go.
Breaking up into those sections, first of all, allows people to sort of dip into it. The section on the Virgin Mary during the month of May, for example, or the sacraments, at various times, and so on. It also afforded an opportunity to bring in different voices, such as yours, and I think the good thing about the different voices is, well, first of all, it's just not mine, but second of all, it helps to show how the teachings of the Church are embodied,
right?
You know, in the different ways. And one thing that I really like about it is you do have some famous people in there, but they're not necessarily doing what they usually do. Like Helen Alvarez, who's you know, I count as a friend and you know, great lawyer, very you know, very outspoken for the church and for the truth of what it means to be a woman. But here she is just running on prayer.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful just to kind of get, you know, that she gives that expression to.
Yeah, it's an intimate side of how people are living. Marianne Glendon has a beautiful essay here, Archbishop Chaput, and others. Tell me about Liz Lovett, who is one of your introes. Her writing appears here posthumously.
Posthumously, yes.
Why was she included? Who is she?
Liz Lovett was a friend of mine. I got to know her through her, well, he eventually became her husband, and he was a friend of a friend, and then he brought her by the church one time. He was a parishioner, and she was not yet Catholic. And so I started meeting with the two of them to basically for her catechesis. She couldn't go to the RCIA classes because just of her work schedule and everything. So we had private meetings, and it was just a lot of fun. And I've never encountered anyone who grasped and assimilated the church's teachings so quickly. I mean, she was really just a great example of how the human heart is made for Catholic truth. And she's always struck me as that. A delightful a memory I have of Liz is on Good Friday, the year that she entered the church. So this is the day before she's baptized. And it's for the veneration of the cross. You know, most Catholics come up and very nervously sort of and furtively sort of kiss the cross really quickly. And
you don't want to get too close because you'll take the germs of the rest of the other parishioners.
Right, or you'll look funny. People. And Liz came up and she grasped the cross and like really took it in her hands and then gave a genuine, unfeigned kiss, and there was an audible smack in the church, and people looked up, and she immediately looked up and blushed, but it was so genuine and honest. And Liz passed away last summer of cancer, and left a husband and children. Really, but a beautiful witness to not just living the Catholic faith, but perhaps even more importantly, dying well. Suffering and dying well.
How do you explain to people tragedies like that? I was going to ask you about, you know, the slaughter of Christians abroad, but let's just keep it right there.
You don't.
Here's a woman who converted, and yet leaves her family behind.
You know, the world talks about the problem of evil, right? And that's not the way we should talk about it, because problems are meant to be solved. And if we try to solve these things, we end up doing more harm than good. This is the mystery of evil, the mystery of a woman dying and leaving children and a husband. I think you have to revere this situation, and you know, we can talk about it theologically and explain it sort of around the edges, but at the end of the day, you don't explain it. You point to the witness of somebody like Liz, who really lived the Catholic life so beautifully and faced death very courageously. I mean, really looked it in the eye and approached death just as a woman of faith. And that, I think, can do more than any explanation.
You are the Vicar of Clergy for the Diocese of Arlington.
That's right.
You see a lot. You deal with a lot. The happy times in a priest's life, and at times the troubling and dark edges of a priest's life.
Sure.
How do you maintain your faith with all you have to deal with? I would imagine this is a tough assignment and takes its toll on you personally.
I mean, I love our priests, and I think we've got a great diocese, a great group of priests, and so maybe I don't see it taking its toll, but as with anything else, it's just a matter of prayer. You know, taking all of these things to prayer, and the bishop is such a, you know, he's such a good leader, and he's so good to our priests. I mean, I think you've had him on here.
Yes, we have.
And he's so good to the priests. So it's kind of a happy situation for me to be, you know, working for someone who's so good to the priest, and then I think the priests really have an affection for him too. But yeah, there are going to be difficult times, and that's no mystery. It's in every state in life, right? Every vocation has that, and the solution is always and at all times prayer. And if we don't have recourse to that, then these things make no sense.
How do you pray? People always ask that.
Poorly, probably.
Well, not you. I'm not asking how you pray. I'm asking how do we pray?
You would be in really bad trouble.
Well,
I mean, that's a real indictment of your prayer life if you're asking me.
Right. Well, and vice versa. Don't come to me because I don't have a clue. But people do wonder, how do you pray? How do you find God's will in your life?
Right. Well, I think that's one of the sections in the book that I think in a sense is the most practical, if you will, because it's sort of perhaps most nuts and bolts. What does prayer look like? You know, the first step of prayer is the first beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit. You know, people will say, Father, I don't know how to pray. And they don't like it when I say, good. Because, I mean, really, if you kind of swagger up to a priest and say, you know, I know how to pray.
Yeah, I'm at the,
you know, I've crushed it.
I'm at that fourth rate of intimacy. I'm right there. I got it all. He speaks to me directly.
Yeah, if that's what you think, then you're not really praying, probably. The Pharisee in the parable thought he was praying. So the first step really is acknowledging, I don't know how to pray, and then asking for that assistance, asking for the Holy Spirit to there. And one of the things that I'm trying to do in the book is to show how the teachings of the Church really should inform that. It's one of my favorite passages from the Catechism, is that the spiritual life, the doctrine and the spiritual life, I think are intrinsically or intimately bound together, right? And there's always that temptation to think that prayer is sort of this vague thing, and then you have doctrine over here, and not to bring them together. And so to be deep in the teachings of the Church, really, that brings structure to people's prayer. To know the teachings of the Virgin Mary, help us to venerate her better and to be aware of her prayers for us more, to know the teachings on who Jesus Christ is and his human and divine nature, these kind of dry things. Well, we pray to him better if we know who and what he is.
Before I let you go, as I travel, every time your dad's name comes up, and it's come up with great frequency these recent days because of the Supreme Court replacements and who's going to fill the slot and Gorsuch's appointment, everyone inevitably says, did you see the funeral mass? Did you hear his son's homily? Why do you think that homily of yours had such an impact on people that they're still talking about it a year later?
It's a tribute to the mystical body of Christ, because it was so many people praying. I know praying for me, thanks be to God. It's a tribute to the Church's liturgy. You know, we did what we were supposed to do. And I think, you know, the family took a risk in having it at the shrine. And I think really God blessed that event. And he blessed it despite us. And he used, as, you know, Pope Benedict says, you know, inadequate instruments. But that was the sense that we had at the time, and I mean, I hear this too from people, and it's you know, almost a year and a half later.
How long did it take you to write the homily, and how hard was it?
46 years.
Yeah, that's what it sounded like. And I could hear the Dickens in it, and in this book, by the way. You're a fan of Charles Dickens.
I am, and I'm delighted to know that he's showing up there. I hadn't been not conscious of that.
They're little. Well, I'm not going to point it out.
Oh, that's Chesterton. If there's any wordplay, that's Chesterton.
No. There's little. Dickens has a charity for people in the way he writes. He understands them.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge Dickens fan. I read Dickens all the time. This is my, you know, my train and bus reading. But I hear echoes of it around the edges of certainly the homilies.
Boy,
and in that homily, that particular homily.
That's very flattering.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your insight. Thank you for the book.
Great, thank you.
And for polluting your pages by asking me to write an introduction to one of your chapters. That Nothing May Be Lost, Reflections on Catholic Doctrine and Devotion by Father Paul Scalia is available from Ignatius Press and at bookstores everywhere and online through EWTN's religious catalog, EWTNRC.com. That is all the time we have until next week. The show continues on Facebook and Twitter. You can like me on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter. It sounds a little desperate, but the links are at RaymondArroyo.com. We'll be back again next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.